Councilmember Herbig?
He will be here in a minute or two.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Van Ness?
He will also be here in a few minutes.
Councilmember Sperry?
Here.
Mayor Baker?
Here.
Councilmember Danuski?
Here.
Councilmember Curtis?
Present.
Councilmember Smith?
Here.
If you will please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So tonight is a special meeting of the Kenmore City Council. There's only one point on our agenda. There will be no public comment at this meeting. This is a learning session for us. And so with that, the first and only item on the agenda is a presentation on Lakepointe from Dean Weidner. So if you would, sir, come forward with whoever you need. Thank you very much.
In Your Honor, if I may say a couple of things. All of you, and perhaps many in the room, know what Lakepointe is, and if you don't, you'll soon find out. Lakepointe is a name that's been around for a long time here in Kenmore, probably more than 20 years. And it's about 48 acres of largely undeveloped land right on Lake Washington, probably the last of its kind on Lake Washington. It's been used primarily as industrial and storage type land for many, many years. The latest major use on the peninsula area of Lakepointe has been used for 520 bridge construction, components of bridge decking and anchoring for the 520 bridge. That project is all wrapped up now and off the site. But over the last couple of years, Dean Weidner's company has been taking a look at this property, perhaps for future development. And we've been in conversations with them for a while now, and we thought it was time for Mr. Weidner and Kyran Hynes, who is the Weidner team's Director of Development and Acquisitions, to come and talk to the council tonight and introduce this company and talk about their resume, if you will, and also give you a project status update. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Weidner.
Yes, thank you very much, Rob. I appreciate this opportunity, and council members, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, we've been involved with this project now for 3 years already. Time is going by rapidly. And we see it as the absolute best opportunity for development on Lake Washington. It's the front door for Kenmore, and basically what we would like to do is turn somewhat of a scar into a vibrant urban community. And that takes quite a process, a planning process initially, which is the part that we're in right now. Now, I was asked to say a few things about Weidner because we tend to be low profile. We generate all our funds internally, and we've been in this business for 40 years, since 1977 when I founded the company. We're recognized industry-wide as an efficient provider of rental homes and a creative developer. Our total portfolio exceeds 46,000 units, and we're in 10 states and 4 provinces of Canada. We are recognized as the 17th largest apartment owner in the United States by the National Multifamily Housing Council. We also have a development arm and 25 years of track record for that development arm. We have done 23 projects totaling over 4,100 units. in 5 different regions, both in the U.S. and Canada. And we currently have 6 projects under construction, totaling a little bit over 1,300 units. Yes?
Would you let the record show that Councilmember Van Ness and Murphy are present? Thank you. Okay, you start.
Sure. The projects that we currently have under construction are in 3 different states. 3 of them happen to be in Colorado Springs, Colorado, 2 in Washington, 1 in Moses Lake, and 1 in Woodinville, Washington. And then we have a project in the Minnesota market, St. Louis Park, which is a suburb of Minneapolis. I've thrown in a few pretty pictures here just to give you an idea of what we do, because we feel it's pretty unique. Each project is uniquely designed for its own site. The one in front of you here covers 24 acres. We'll have over 1,000 residential units. This is in Woodinville, just down the road. We'll have 60,000 square feet of commercial space. And we have finished phase 1, and we're now going to be starting phase 2. It's a total of 5-phase project. A few more pretty pictures here just to really show you that each one of our projects is unique, and unique for its markets. We win regularly design awards for our markets and for our product. And I think anything that has been built by us has a fantastic reputation in its market. Here are a few more projects. The one in the upper left happens to be in downtown Kirkland in the Juanita area. The one in the middle with a tall roof line is actually in Anchorage, Alaska. So we span quite a few communities. Now, Lakepointe. This is a major commitment. It's almost 52 acres. It's made up of 8 parcels, and it has 3,800 plus lineal feet of shoreline. That's a huge front door to Kenmore. We see it from a little bit more enlarged angle here, but if you were to compare this site with the current downtown area of Kenmore, you'd find that it's basically about the same. So we would be duplicating, or I should say doubling, the current downtown area for Kenmore. And the wonderful thing about it, of course, is it opens up the water to all the residents of Kenmore. It's also at the intersection of 522 and 68th, and has excellent interaction with the Burke-Gilman Trail, which can actually be have an offshoot, a secondary route around the entire project. Now, the history of Lakepointe is really that it was a shallow delta at the mouth of Sammamish River before Lake Washington was lowered. It then became a landfill, primarily for the Department of Transportation, through its expansion of I-5, and that happened in the 60s and 70s. And then it's been the home to a number of industrial uses since that time, from Kenmore Building Materials to Pioneer Towing to Alaska Pipeline Services, and most recently the Kiewit Company 520 Bridge Replacement Program. Because of this unique background on the site, it's got some serious technical problems. It has some unstable soils because of the fill, and it is under a subject to a consent decree and cleanup action for some of the pollution that was determined to be in that fill. It also has traffic challenges in that it needs to create a couple new access points to both 522 and 68th, as well as impacts in traffic further on down on 522. We have an EIS, Environmental Impact Statement. However, it's an old one, and we will be doing an update and amended EIS process, and that should probably start in the next 6 months or so, and that will start a process that normally is a year and a half. Then after that process, and actually during some of that same time, we would be going in for shoreline permitting, and that's a process that also takes 2 to 3 years. So there are some extensive processes that have to be gone through before these ideas actually become a project. Now, there are also some extraordinary site development costs. That's the reason it's the last site on Lake Washington and hasn't been done before. Just the piling and capping of the site alone is approximately $100 million. Transportation and access is another 70+ million. And then, of course, there's some shoreline improvement and utilities, which also have to be added to fully develop the site. Now, we're one of a long line of developers that have taken on this site. As early as the early 90s, Tramwell Crow did preliminary analysis and looks at the site. They're obviously a substantial company that most people recognize throughout the United States. XXII in 1999 did a serious look at the site also, and they're a major developer. They actually developed the Mall of Americas in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and prior to that they developed this large mall in Edmonton, Canada. Some of the other groups that took a look at it were Security Properties, Port Blakely, and so on down the list. We think we're the ones that can get this project done. We're local. I've been involved with the owner of this site for 30-some years as a partner in other real estate adventures, and we certainly have the knowledge of the area and are willing to commit our resources to see it through. Now, the first part of any development is to create the vision for that development. And that's what I want to bring you up to date on, particularly this evening, because we've done that. And to start with, I'd like to read you a poem that I think puts everything in perspective. The great fact of life, the always possible escape from dullness, was the lake. The sun rose out of it. The day began there. It wasn't like an open door that nobody could shut. The land in all its dreariness could never close in on you. You had only to look at the lake, and you knew you would always be free. And that's, in very nice words, what the development of this site will mean to Kenmore. It will open up, for the first time, the lake really to Kenmore with its 1,800 lineal feet of frontage. Now, we held what we call the leapfrogging session, which is a visioning session. We had 21 participants, 7 observers, 2 facilitators. And our objective for that leapfrogging session was to begin authoring a vision for Lakepointe as a completely integrated mixed-use community. Now, we had a number of important considerations. Six of them were key. And I won't read each one of these, but I will hit a few of the highlights. First of all, we wanted to ensure that planning and design of Lakepointe follows the most thoughtful principles of placemaking in order to provide a sense of health, happiness, and belonging. Next, we wanted to make sure that and visualize a community that used all of its natural settings to full advantage, including the lake, the river, parklands, green spaces, view corridors, and the site's year-round relationship to sun, shade, and weather. Then it was important for us to also establish a standard of excellence in how we developed the site and what was in it. Next, we wanted to conceive of a village with a vitality that appeals to all generations. In that process, we wanted to invent a smart community that makes optimal use of many of the emerging technologies that we have today, such as ride-sharing, hybrid vehicles, electric bicycles, shuttles, driverless cars, water taxis, amphibious aircraft represented by Kenmore Air, and other links via the water. Now, we did this for a day and a half, and I was very pleased with the results. It really allowed people to get all their ideas out, share those ideas with one another, and really brainstorm in a free-floating environment of ideas and acceptance. And we believe that a number of game-changing things came out of that thought process. So here are a dozen innovative ideas from the session that could help differentiate Lakepointe. First, Lakepointe would become known as the lake's headwater, its crown, its premier destination. Secondly, the vision of Lakepointe would include a large farmers market as a magnet for a regional destination known for wineries, culinary arts, and artisan foods. We would include a boutique hotel in that combination, which emphasized a high level of personalized service and chic contemporary design both inside and out. We'd have an indoor-outdoor aspect for the entire village. In the planning, we would be focusing on outdoor restaurants, outdoor coffee shops, or coffee shops and bistros that had outdoor areas that really could be used on a year-round basis. I know we have this rain that seems to seek us out on a regular basis, but you know they have the same thing in Paris. And in Paris, they have these open bistros and coffee shops, and they're populated with huge numbers of people on a day-in, day-out basis, even in the rain. And we would be using some of those same techniques. We'd also be emphasizing fireplaces, just to warm it up, to create that sense of warmth throughout the community. And there wouldn't be just a few, but really quite a few in some of these open areas, as well as in our interiors for restaurants and coffee houses. And then, again, we would bring in the indoor-outdoor feeling for our offices through views, rooftop meeting areas, all to attract just a great atmosphere for doing business. Lakepointe would also be a jumping-off point for a vast system of trails and integrated transportation, water as well as air. And the entire village will be designed to be a staging area for 2 or 3 televised international events a year. We think this would be a perfect place for a triathlon. You have both the trails, the biking, and the water all right here. It would be a perfect event center for that. We would be planning to incorporate in this design a waterfront amphitheater as a primary venue to host activities such as concerts and public gatherings. And then one of the new ideas, particularly to me, but it's certainly can be illuminating and act as a recognition point if we were to establish something like a Dutch Hovenring to tie both Lakepointe and the downtown city of Kenmore together. It would visually create a stopping point along that 522 corridor. Everybody would see it. It would allow people that are walking, biking, etc., to get from one area to another, and it could just be a marvelous addition to the community. We'd also have design, construction, and operation of the village as a model for public-private partnerships throughout the country, where we'd actually have a actual experience where planners, architects, developers, and community leaders from around the world could gather and study how we did it. And then finally, we have the role of storytelling. Well, I shouldn't say finally, we have two more, but we also have the role of storytelling that plays an important part in the marketing of this destination and the branding of Kenmore. In this whole process, we'd be including Bastyr University. We would attempt to connect Lakepointe via a trail to Bastyr, which we think we can do. We think the promotion of Lakepointe as well as Bastyr can be somewhat tied together. And we just feel we have a real asset there that both Lakepointe and Bastyr can generate positive gain from. And then finally, Woodinville, of course, has set itself up as the wine country of the Northwest, but we're just a short drive from Woodinville, and we feel that we could hitchhike on that and gain some winery business as well as some wine tasting areas as an important ingredient in the retail aspect of the project. So those are some of the highlights of the various ideas that came out of the process, and a much more extensive brochure is available here this evening for you to look at and read in your leisure. Now I'd like to give you kind of a project update. First of all, on the land acquisition and assemblage area, of course, we have a long-term contract on the primary site. In addition to that, we've purchased 4 parcels along 175th. We've done our title survey and all of our due diligence review. And in fact, this is what the site now looks like. We've even taken a portion of that little island and purchased that in the Sammamish River because we think that that could give us a coupling point to some city-owned land that's actually on the other side of the river. So perhaps we could get a route from Lakepointe itself over that island to tie in with the city property on the other side. And then, as I said, we've spent a considerable period of time on this project so far. We've done several market demand studies, and we've done several studies on economic feasibility. We've completed our engineering review and cost estimates. We have identified the infrastructure and geotechnical challenges. We can't put that into final numbers until we have an ultimate design, but we've really taken a thorough look at that. And of course, we've done preliminary traffic assessment and early environmental review. We've done conceptual site planning and density analysis, as well as phasing considerations. This project definitely would be phased. Most likely, it would have 6 or 7 different phases to it because it's so extensive that it couldn't all be done at once. We've looked at several different plans, one that includes mid-rises and another one that even includes a series of high-rises. So all of these have been looked at, and we're currently evaluating them in terms of economic justification. And then, of course, on a day-in, day-out basis, particularly Kyran is involved in sessions to see that we meet the commercial site development permit requirements laid out by the city. And some of those are, of course, in the public outreach area, which this is the first step at starting to do that. We obviously have a lot of work to do in future development of the site, and we are currently working with both Department of Transportation and Ecology on the way we develop the site. And we feel, in sort of conclusion here, that we're at a threshold point in the project. Some of our key things that we need to do here in the immediate future is establish a path to economic viability. And that path to economic viability includes the phasing, the type of structures that we actually put on the project, and to what extent we can get some financial assistance for some transportation and some of the other extra costs of the site. And then, as we go forward with that, we need to create the framework for a development agreement for the public-private partnership here with the city of Kenmore. So that kind of ends my formal presentation, but I'd certainly be open to any questions from any of you.
Sure. Thank you, Dean. I appreciate the presentation. And I have a question. I have a few questions, but one of the questions I had was regarding the height restrictions and how you see that playing out as far as building heights and restrictions with regards to the flight patterns and restrictions on with the airspace above. Do you have anything you can add on that?
Well, I think the current height restrictions are around 85 feet or so. And we certainly would have some buildings that would come up to that level. We would probably be suggesting a few more that would go higher than that level. We certainly wouldn't have them in the flight path because obviously Kenmore Air is very important, and we don't want to interfere with their operation in any way.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a couple of thoughts since that leapfrog session. And that there seems to be an opportunity here in the future with the cruise industry that we have. And the fact that they're putting on little pre-cruise events and post-cruise events, that Lakepointe could be an interesting destination even before a cruise or after a cruise, especially with what's being planned for the boutique hotel. And some of the wineries up in Woodinville, and who knows what will happen by that time. I also thought it was a good way to tie in Kenmore Air that could perhaps either ferry their passengers back to the boat on pre-cruise or down closer to the airport on post-cruise when they're on their way home. But it might be a very advantageous way of exposing people from different parts of the country and world to what would happen in Kenmore.
I think that's a fantastic thought and idea. It certainly can, because the cruise ship companies in their competition with one another are always looking for amplification of their destinations. And as you know, the Port of Seattle is a jumping off point, particularly for Alaska, but for southbound cruising as well. And one of the things you need to do or can do to be more competitive is to offer more opportunities at that departure destination or origination. And this would be perfect for that. Absolutely.
I just see a unique aspect to
Mayor, can you turn your microphone on, please? Thank you.
I just see it as a unique aspect to tie in with Kenmore Air, because there's a lot of people that haven't experienced that, and it's such a unique adventure that it just seems like a natural. So
That would be great. Absolutely fantastic.
Councilmember Curtis.
Thank you again for coming and presenting, and had a question. So you've done a lot of projects throughout several countries and a lot of large ones. So one part of the question is, does anything match the size and complexity of this one? And then kind of a related question is, when things get into really, unusual situations, and I'm not being a contractor, I'm not sure if I'm asking the question right, but I sort of see general contractors often sub out pieces, or they get special consultants to do unique pieces of their job. So I guess that's the question. Do you have the capacity with your own group to do all those special pieces, or would you be working with some other groups or consultants or specialists?
We would definitely be working with some other groups. We're partnering right now with Ryan Companies in Minneapolis on a site there that we're planning on building. And the Ryan Companies also is involved in the development of Kirkland Urban's downtown center right now. You'd probably see their signs there. But they're a very large general contractor as well as commercial specialist. And we have not contacted them about this in terms of definite participation, but somebody like them would be somebody we would partner with. We also think that we're quite good at multifamily and mixed use, which includes the retail portion. The area that we are not as well versed in is the commercial area. And again, we would either go to Orion or to several others that are involved in the commercial area to help take on that portion of the project.
Thank you.
Councilmember Herbig.
Well, thank you very much for coming and presenting. As you know, that area of the lake, there are a lot of concerns about contaminants in the dirt around the lake, and then there are concerns of what's actually under the dirt on the site. Can you speak a little bit about how you're going to approach that and keep the lake safe while you do the development?
That's a great question. First of all, the site is a monitored site. I think there's a full testing of this site that occurs every 4 years, and that's been going on since the 90s. So there's about a 15 to 18 year period of monitoring. And quite frankly, the monitoring hasn't showed any kind of problem at all, really, that I'm aware of during that period of time. Now, one of the things that would happen in this particular site is there would be piling. And one of the first big tests for this site would be to do a piling test. And of course, we would be monitoring that, particularly at that time, to see if piling would create any kind of a problem at all.
Councilmember Danuski.
Hi, thanks for coming, and thank you for all the work that you've put into this so far. I was curious if you have an estimate on the number of units that you would have, or if you're still working that out, if that's part of the numbers game.
We're really thinking that we would be around the 2,000 unit area, about 650,000 square feet of office, and about 126,000 of retail. And we've been using those figures in a number of our estimates and viability estimates.
Okay.
Before I start around again, Councilmember Sperry.
Well, thank you again for being here, and it was such an honor to be a part of the Leapfrog session. That was really special to see all the different people from all over the world, really, that came in to provide input on this project. One of the things that the public cares deeply about is access to the lake. And in general terms, you mentioned about how this is going to open up 1,800 square feet of lake shoreline. Could you maybe talk specifically about what some of the ideas are for people having access?
We have a number of ideas along that line. First of all, there are setback requirements from the river as well as the Lake Washington. So those setback requirements basically allow a nice big public area to be opened up. And within that area, we would be intending to have some very significant paths, and that's too small a term, really. These paths may be 20, 25 feet in width, because it would offer also secondary access for fire vehicles, which we have to provide around the exterior. So it would serve as that function for sure in addition. And then off of that huge path that would go around, we would have some beach access. We would want to create some areas where there could be kayaks launched, as well as some swimming activities and these type of things right off of there. And we would propose to actually make an extension of the Burke-Gilman Trail that would go entirely around the property, so that it wouldn't take the place of the Burke-Gilman Trail, but anybody that wanted to take sort of the Lakepointe loop could do that around Lakepointe, and that would further open it up, of course, to runners and bicyclers and all of that. Yeah.
Councilmember Smith.
First I want to have a follow-up on Councilmember Herbig's question, or your response regarding the testing of the site. I wanted to know, you said there's a monitoring program that's been going on, and every 4 years they go through that. Will you be doing a testing, like a pile testing, to give you a sample of that before you decide what your infrastructure needs are?
By all means, yes,
Okay.
we would do that.
And do you know when approximately that happens, or when you would expect to do something like that?
I would hope that we could do that within the next 14 to 16 months.
Okay, great. And then also, with regards to the beach access and the swimming and everything, how do you anticipate addressing the water quality issues that we're currently already experiencing, that at various times are pretty poor, as far as the different types of plant material and different things that are growing in the lake there? How do you see that playing out with regards to trying to utilize the waterfront for public use?
Well, we would certainly have to have that tested for any area that we took a look at. Quite frankly, I would think we would be a little bit more on the Sammamish River side of that, because you do have a flow going there, and if I'm not mistaken, to the extent that we do have problems in some beach areas along Lake Washington, it's when there is no flow and it's kind of still. So we would be looking at those areas that provide good health and not a questionable area.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Councilmember Curtis.
Yes, sir.
A question related to transportation. So with passage of ST3 and kind of the larger perspective of transportation in kind of the whole Puget Sound, how do you see yourself linking with that? Part of that included the rapid bus transportation and then the parking structures somewhere along 522.
Well, we certainly would like to see a parking structure on our site that would feed that transportation mix. That's currently somewhat up in the air because we don't know where that's going right now. We've heard that there might even be a possibility of light rail at some point in the future. That would be obviously fantastic, but we would certainly design a site that would allow for that as an opportunity.
So on that same transportation issue, you know that I've sort of, and my wife's sort of been working diligently to try to get a water taxi or ferry up here, a passenger-only
Yes.
ferry. And if that were to come to fruition, I know that this is a multi-year project, multi-stage project, but we don't know where the county is at with this. But if anything were to come of that, and that he did want to move, even with some exploratory routes or that, could they be accommodated by
Absolutely.
Weidner and Associates to get sort of a demonstration route or a pioneer route together?
Absolutely. We would love to see that happen. We would make sure that happens. Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Herbig.
More of a statement than a question, and I know I've said this to you before when we met, whenever that was, a year ago. And one of my biggest worries has always been that Lakepointe becomes something unto itself and separate from the rest of the city, and it's encouraging in your presentation, to see the efforts made to link the rest of the city and have it integrated into the city, because that would, I think it'd be a serious loss if it became kind of a separate entity, separate from the rest of the city. So I appreciate your efforts to really integrate and increase access from the rest of the city into and out of Lakepointe. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that's extremely important. It really wants to be part of Kenmore, and we have a number of innovative ideas how we can make sure that we're integrated.
Councilmember Danuski.
Hi, I have a question on roads. I saw on your drawings you kind of had basically the same kind of road layout in both of those drawings. How solid is that, and how do you expect your traffic flow to merge in with our already fairly congested traffic?
A couple of the ideas that we were talking about is actually, I'd like to see, and what is that road, 175th, go underneath 68th, I think it is, because you've actually got that road right on the same road on the other side, and that feeds into 522 and a couple other intersections farther down the road. So that's one of the ideas that we're pursuing. I'd actually like to see access again underneath the freeway, underneath 522, connecting one of our main roads to one of your main roads currently in Kenmore.
Yeah, thank you. It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. It's a tricky one.
It is a little tricky.
Deputy Mayor Van Ness.
Thank you. Again, thanks for coming and sharing this with us. And sorry I didn't wear my coat and tie. I didn't get out of the university till 5:45, so didn't have time to get home. I didn't want to miss any of this. Anyway, question I have is regarding, you had one image that showed a couple of different plans of buildings out on the point, some taller, some lower. You alluded to going higher than the 85 feet or so. And I think I've mentioned to you, a year or so ago in the past, the possibility of going even higher than that towards 68th in the east and the south of the site, and leaving more of the peninsula open and open space, which then would result in less piles that have to be driven through the fill that is there. And I think you kind of touched on it there. If you could expand upon any thinking you have along those lines, I'd appreciate it.
Gosh, that's a great question. I almost would have liked to had that one planted myself. That was a good question. One of the reasons we do have some higher buildings under consideration is that very reason. We can do a lot less piling on the site by doing that, and that actually does two things. It brings some of the cost down, which is important, but at the same time, you're not filling your entire site with piling, which could have some environmental impact. We obviously don't know that till we test it, but we'd like to keep it to a smaller amount rather than larger. At the same time, if we what they call unbundle the buildings in the site, it means that we can have a separate foundation for a high-rise building, which is obviously a pretty extensive foundation. We would have a different foundation entirely for the parking garage, which doesn't have to be nearly as intrusive into the site. And you'd have a third type of foundation, very modest foundation for the townhomes that would probably go around the parking garage. So that would lighten up the load on the site considerably and reduce the amount of piling. And again, as soon as you start doing something vertical, you basically open the whole site up. And it allows a lot more room for parks and public spaces.
And the fewer the piling you have to drive, the less the noise pollution you would have. You can't drive a piling down through all that without making a lot of racket. And the fewer you have to do, the easier it is on the neighborhood and the environment as well, I imagine.
That's right. Now, I do understand in the piling area from the experts that we talked to is that the pilings would go down pretty easily through the site until they hit bedrock. Of course, they said it was like going through butter, but we'll see when they do the first tests. But they say that that'll be a pretty easy thing for them to do.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Sperry.
Thank you. So another question I'm always asked, and I think it's probably representative of my age group, where we have big houses and big yards, and we're thinking, what are our options? And one of the questions I always get asked is, will there be any condos? And so that, if you could talk a little bit about that. And I think it also might be good to hear what options, type of housing options are you considering at this point?
Well, first of all, on condos, I'd love to see some condos on the site. That generally tends to be more of a function of market than it does anything else. You are seeing a couple condo towers recently completed in downtown Seattle, and I believe there's one or two that are under the planning stages or beginning stages in Bellevue. And that's great. That means the condo market is coming back, and in that case, you'd see condo. I think you're also going to see significant numbers of townhomes. That we would use the townhomes around the parking structure, so that you really don't see the parking at all. It's kind of buried in the middle, and we would do that with probably a two-story townhome. Entered from grade on one side and a one-story townhome on top of that at a slightly higher grade. And let's see, of course, then you'd have apartments as well.
Councilmember Curtis.
I have a question related to water-related projects. The city's been doing a lot of work with Log Boom, Rhododendron Park, Squires, with our walkways and waterways. So I hear a lot about the development of the land piece of it and the little park strip, but how about actually using the water in some fashion that would, it seems ideal?
Well, we'd certainly like to increase the access to the water. However, back to Kenmore Air, that's one of the things we would want to keep a lot of that activity in the Sammamish River. You don't want little boats and kayaks and that type of thing going out sort of into the Lake Washington flight area that they're using.
Councilmember Smith.
Dean, can you tell me, with knowing we're having a new bridge going across 68th, and I know there's a new access point onto 68th and the rerouting of the road or creation of a new road, is there any chance that there will be a conflict in the new bridge that's being created and proposed to be constructed with the connection with the Lakepointe site? And are you coordinating with staff and others to make sure that we don't have that conflict?
Right. We want to make sure that we don't have a conflict. That intersection that's being planned is excellent. We would be changing a road in our particular site to match up to that intersection because that's an important intersection. I would like to keep that. It's not the intersection right now, but 175th kind of goes up about 10 feet in elevation or so to get up to the 68th. I'd like to see that go under 68th. Now, we haven't proposed that yet, but that's what I'd really like to see happening.
Okay, great. And can you tell me or give us any light on how you see the current asphalt and cement plant playing out in your long-term plans here?
Well, the great news is we have an option to purchase that anytime they want to sell and in the foreseeable future. And we've actually talked to them at length about 12, 15 years from now seems like a good time for them to exit. We haven't come to an agreement, but we have had some conversations with them about that.
Thank you.
We'd like to keep them here for as long as the project's under construction.
Yes. Thank you.
Councilmember Sperry, then Councilmember Herbig.
Thank you. So, Mr. Weidner, one of the things that I know that you mentioned early on is how you would like to use some innovative technology to make this eco-friendly, minimizing the carbon impact and all that. And I also have family members that are very interested in that. And is there something you could talk about there with some of your ideas?
Yes, particularly on some of the taller buildings. We think that we would have an array of electric panels on that as part of the actually artistic sort of roof structure of it, but in turn that would take care of a lot of the electrical needs of the building itself. We also have a unique opportunity at this site because we have the sewer and water district pumping station actually is almost part of our site, and that leads to a huge sewer line that leads to Lake Washington and around Lake Washington. And actually we can use that or access to that facility for both heating and cooling through a utility system. And that would keep the entire thing at very, very low cost for the individual customer if that were able to be achieved.
For most people, that would be a very unique method of heating and cooling an entire community. So is that something that's been done before? Would this be a first?
Actually, it has been done before a number of times, particularly in Vancouver, Washington, and its suburbs. So it's not a new process, but one that's actually proven at this point.
Excellent. And then just to be clear, when you mentioned the electrical panels on the tops, were you thinking solar to generate
yes.
to generate electricity?
Solar panels.
Excellent.
Councilmember Herbig.
So you said, if I remember, I may have misheard, you said about 200,000 square feet of retail. Was that correct?
126,000.
Okay. What sort of scale of retail are you looking at? Are you looking at just a couple big stores? Are you looking at a bunch of smaller stores? What sort of scale are you thinking for your retail?
A small scale. We would think we would have a grocery, but the grocery would be more like 3,000 to 5,000 square feet. It wouldn't be a destination grocer, but rather a grocer for that particular area. We would like to have a little bit more artisan type of shops as opposed to having just chains of people come in there. We'd like to have it really, truly unique. We see this as a real destination for people to come visit because of a bakery or a winery or a wine tasting room or even a coffee place.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
You mentioned, I think, 600,000 square feet of commercial. I
Yes.
think that's what you said. Do you have any ideas of what kind of commercial you would like to attract to that? A major corporation home office or a bunch of different commercial businesses? Of what type do you have in mind? Do you have any thoughts along those lines?
We'd obviously like to have somebody that had a campus of sorts, but it could be a campus that's just a part of maybe their total overall organization. We are going to have a conversation here very soon with Amazon because this would offer a very unique environment for them. We obviously have other tech companies that we would be contacting, and then if we did not, were not successful in creating a campus, then we would actually lease it out thousands of square feet at a time.
Any thoughts about an educational institution?
Educational institution would be fantastic. We've obviously got Bastyr just up the road and University of Washington in Bothell, but if we had another interested education.
Like the university has schools in outlying areas separate from the Montlake and the Bothell campuses, like the School of Business down in southern Kirkland, and what's going in the Spring District with conjunction with China tech stuff. And I could see a computer engineering school separate from the university, any kind of a thing like that. Maybe something not even sponsored by the university, but by one of the tech companies. I don't know whether you've communicated with them about that or not.
We haven't at this point, but we'd be very excited about that as well.
They're all crying for more tech, more talent, more engineers, and if they're not getting it from the immigration and they're not getting it from the universities, why not train their own?
Exactly.
Possibility that I'd thought about.
Very good.
I like the idea of Amazon because it's a natural water taxi service with Kenmore Air to Amazon between two campuses. So.
Well, that's for sure. Yeah, that would be easy.
Councilmember Curtis.
So I have another question related to kind of the water use. So will it have docking facilities for some of the nice big boats from down lake to come up and spend an afternoon in Kenmore and maybe have lunch at one of your fine restaurants and spend some money in Kenmore?
We anticipate having a small marina there, and the marina would have, as planned in the past, 40 to 52 slips were what was planned in the past. So it would be something in that magnitude. We'd have some day boat activities, but again, we would have to work with Kenmore Air on that because they would just as soon not like to see too much boat activity there.
Thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
You may have mentioned this earlier this evening, but I know you talked about the square footage and gross building area for offices and retail. Can you tell me what the number of units that you're now looking at for residential units or in a gross building area amount? Just
residential units would be about 2,000.
2,000, okay. Thank you. And I do have one more question.
Sure, go ahead.
And that has to do with the city's role. Can you tell me, I guess, one, is the city playing the role you anticipated when you started this 3 years ago? And if it isn't, I'm just curious where you see things that could be done differently or going forward, how you see the city's role in this as you're starting to get further and further into your development process.
Well, the city's been very, very supportive, and I very much appreciate that. We appreciate that. This project is going to take some consideration in terms of tax deferral and those kinds of things in order to cover some of those extraordinary costs that we're talking about. So we haven't outlined that exactly, but we're actually starting to look at what that entails.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
In one of your slides, you mentioned public-private partnerships. There I'm looking at right now is the last one.
Yes.
As far as I know, the traditional public-private partnership is not legal in the state of Washington. That doesn't mean that a public entity like the city and a private entity like you can't work together in some type of a cooperative, symbiotic relationship. But as far as the city assuming some of the risk of a private development, I think that's one of the reasons why we don't. It's different here in the state of Washington than it is in other parts of the country. So how would you foresee the city and your business working together?
I really see it working together to come to conclusions that work for both parties. They wouldn't be involved in the same corporation. There wouldn't be any risk on part of the city. That wouldn't make much sense. But I do see working together. For example, one of the things that we're working with your city department and starting to bring them into the equation would be we'd just as soon have some parking capability, parking spots that are a little bit smaller than normally is required. And that's because we're seeing smaller cars. Parking is a very expensive portion of the site development, which really doesn't generate any revenue. It just generates cost primarily. So there's a number of things that the city can do in its regulatory area that are necessary and important, and that would be part of this partnership.
Changing the codes and so on, and with autonomous vehicles coming in, they don't need a wide parking space because there's nobody getting in and out of the doors when they're in the parking lot. So it can be very narrow and very little space between the cars when they park.
Exactly, and actually if we're doing these clusters of buildings where we have an office, we have a residential building, we have a parking area and townhomes, you basically get to share some of those parking spots between the office and the residential. Because the office wants to use those parking spots during the day primarily, while usually the residential people are out. And then, of course, at night the residential people want to use those parking spots and the commercial people are gone. So by combining that, we think we can reduce the parking requirements by probably as much as 25%.
One other thing I'd like to mention, you mentioned having the townhomes around the parking structure.
Yes.
And that's what you've done in Woodinville, where you look at the building and you don't see a parking garage. You see brownstone brick structure and the townhomes, and there's a little passageway to drive in to get to the parking structure. You drive up the parking structure, you park your car right by your back door, and you get out of your car and go in the back door of the unit. You don't see the parking structure, and it's really nice. It's a nice way of doing things.
Exactly.
And the audience that wants to see some of his work, the units that are going in Woodinville, not Wooden Creek, I know some people will live there, and they really enjoy it.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry, I didn't have that.
Councilmember Smith?
I have just one last comment, and that is with regards to the point. I consider that to be the gem of the site, and I'm sure you do too, and as a developer, you want to maximize your return. But I would say that anything you can do to try to diminish the construction at the point and have as much open space out there. You mentioned the amphitheater. I don't exactly know where that would fit into your plan, but I would say that's a critical component from the community's perspective.
Thank you, and we agree totally, and actually that would be the location for the amphitheater. We really see a lot of public space at that point, because that's, as you say, exactly where you want to have that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Danuski?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo Councilmember Smith there, and the community is just dying to get out to that point and have some, just a really, really great park out there. So thank you for considering that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sperry?
So recently, Mr. Weidner, we had for the Love of Kenmore 2.0 event where we had citizens come and do generate ideas about how to do love notes for their city in terms of engaging with it. And one of them that came out was having events on Lakepointe before, pre-construction, if you will. And there were some great suggestions and concerts, and I think later on I suggested the 4th of July and Councilmember Herbrigg suggested the hydroplane races. We have a Hydro Cup that just happened a couple weeks ago. But one of the interesting things that the citizen said was, he said, right now it feels like it's a place you shouldn't go. And it's like you shouldn't go there. And so we kind of jokingly had the conversation. I said, well, we need to break that sand barrier. And I think we do, because right now the perception is different. You've got this great vision, but right now it's looked at as you can't go there, and it's industrial, and I think it would be really a tremendous way to introduce the concept to our community, to have the opportunity to get on the site and to view the 4th of July fireworks from there, or have some temporary concerts or things like that. So
I think that's a great idea. And let's see, actually, let's go all the way back here. How do I get to the first slide? One of the things most likely that would happen in the development is we would start more towards the 68th and maybe up towards 175th, because you want to start the project where you're extending your sewer and water and utility lines and that type of thing the least amount, because those are obviously very expensive to bring on into the site, and you don't want to have to redo your entire road structure to be starting to utilize a portion. So you'd actually see the development sort of start there. But one of the things we've talked about is, should we take our spine road all the way through the site, and you actually see these big, the roofs of some of those buildings there.
Mr. Weidner, you can use the mouse pointer.
Oh,
right there in red.
Right alongside. There you go.
This is it?
Yep.
No,
just roll it on the table.
Roll it on the table.
Oh, okay. I'm going to let you point with that mouse pointer. So anyway, the development would be over in that area initially, but then we'd have a spine road that would come all the way on down. And in that point area is where you do your amphitheater again. And we probably could do that spine road because in order to protect the public, of course, we'd have to have that fenced off from the rest of the site that's not developed. And then we would open up into the amphitheater there on the point. And that would get everybody down there. So we could actually do that. And we've talked about, could we do a kind of interpretive center at the same time? I don't know how many of you have seen the center that Kemper Freeman has in Bellevue. Have any of you seen that center he has there, that where he's actually talking about what's happening with that development? But it's excellent, and we wouldn't have it quite that elaborate, but still pretty elaborate center talking about Lakepointe and where it was going, and then actually developing some of that public area. The big question there is, could we get shoreline approval for a limited area? And again, in working with the city council and its Brian and all of his staff, it would require some limited approvals to use a portion of the area as opposed to waiting for the approval for the whole darn area and then getting in there, because that whole approval is a longer process. Yes.
All right. City manager, you got some final thoughts here?
I do. Well, first of all, this is a big deal for the city. I think the community's been wanting something to happen here for many years, many decades for that matter, and it really does have the ability to transform our town, at least the downtown hub or downtown core of our city. And we've seen the samples of the high-quality work that your firm can do, and so we're thrilled that you're interested in this site, and we're eager to work with you. So I hope we've conveyed that message to you, and we're just really glad that you're here tonight and able to have a conversation with us. Also, there's a reason why this site is still largely undeveloped and why it's sort of languished for so many years, and we've talked about it tonight already, and that's the extraordinary costs that are associated with this site. Chief among those extraordinary costs are going to be the pile driving. We're talking about thousands of steel piles that are going to have to be driven into the ground, many millions of dollars. This is an example of the type of extraordinary costs that this project's going to have that other projects like it aren't going to have. And so dealing with those costs and bridging the gap created by those costs is going to be difficult. It's not going to be a slam dunk. We're going to have to be very creative and do whatever we can to leverage other resources, including the resources of the state to help us. There are examples in the state of Washington where they use tax increment financing, and what that is they use a portion of the state's new revenue generated by the new developed project to help pay for public infrastructure, including utilities and roads and things like that. So we may be needing to get legislation passed by the state to allow such tools as tax increment financing for this project, and other creative methods to help bridge the gap created by the extraordinary costs. So I don't want that to be lost on any of us. This project is not a slam dunk because of those extraordinary costs. It's a wonderful dream and a wonderful vision, and I think we can help make it happen, but it ain't going to be easy. Yeah. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. So if there's no further business to come in front of this council, we are adjourned.